Imagine being born into a world where your faith could literally get you killed, only to see it become the official religion of the most powerful empire on Earth, all before you even get old. And that's not some fantasy. That was the reality for people living in the Roman Empire in the 4th century. So how in the world did a persecuted faith pull this off? Let's unpack this absolutely incredible 70-year transformation.
So let's just let that sink in. In 303 CE, if you were a Christian, you were being hunted down and executed. Fast forward less than a single lifetime to 380, and Christianity is now the official, mandatory religion of the entire Roman state. So how on earth did this happen? How did a persecuted sect pull off one of the most stunning reversals of fortune in all of history? That's the big question we're diving into today.
To really get just how radical this change was, you have to understand the world before everything flipped. Before the year 313, being a Christian in the Roman Empire was, to put it mildly, a very, very dangerous choice.
Now, this wasn't just random hatred. If you think about it from the Roman perspective, Christians looked like a genuine threat. For starters, they refused to worship the emperor as a god, which to a Roman looked like pure treason. That immediately branded them as disloyal. Then you have the fact that they held all these secret meetings, which, naturally made people suspicious. And maybe the most alarming thing for the authorities, this faith was spreading like wildfire. And not just among the poor, it was catching on in every social class. You can kind of see how this was a recipe for some serious official paranoia.
And that paranoia? It absolutely reached its peak right before our story's big turning point. The so-called Great Persecution, led by Emperor Diocletian, wasn't just a bit of local harassment. No, this was a systematic, empire-wide campaign to completely stamp out Christianity. Churches were leveled, sacred texts were torched, and believers were executed. This was the brutal reality on the ground in 303 CE.
And then, just when things looked their bleakest, everything changed. A new emperor, a civil war, and a legendary vision in the sky kicked off a complete 180 in Roman policy, starting with the absolutely critical turning point in 312. So the story goes like this. On the eve of a massive, make-or-break battle for control of Rome itself, Constantine looks up at the sky and sees a vision, a Christian symbol. And with it, he hears these words, "In this sign, you will conquer." He immediately orders his soldiers to paint that symbol on their shields. And what happens? They win the battle. Constantine was convinced he had won through the power of the Christian God. And from that moment on, history was never, ever the same. So the first official move came just a year later, in 313, with the Edict of Milan. And this wasn't just some minor policy tweak, it was a revolution. First, it granted religious toleration to everyone, which meant, for the first time, Christianity was legal. Second, it ordered that all the church property that had been seized had to be returned. And third, and maybe most important of all, it officially ended all state-sponsored persecution. In a single stroke, Christianity went from being a hunted, illegal cult to a legally protected religion. But here's the thing. Constantine didn't just stop at making Christianity legal. Oh no. Mere tolerance very quickly turned into active, powerful support. And this next phase is what really cemented the church's new place in the empire. And the speed of this whole thing is just breathtaking. You've got Constantine's victory in 312, the Edict of Milan in 313, but the next steps you see here, the Council of Nicaea, and later the Edict of Thessalonica, are what would take Christianity from simply being protected to being actively promoted, and finally, to being number one.
It's one thing to be tolerated. It's a whole other ballgame to have the emperor as your biggest fan. Constantine started pouring imperial money into building massive churches, like the original St. Peter's Basilica. He gave Christian clergy huge tax breaks and special legal status. All of a sudden, bishops weren't hiding from the authorities, they were in the palace advising them.
But all this explosive growth came with some serious growing pains, especially deep disagreements over theology. The biggest one was a belief called Arianism, which basically questioned whether Jesus was fully divine. Now, for an emperor like Constantine who wanted unity above all else, all this infighting was a massive political problem. His solution? He called the first ever global summit of bishops, the Council of Nicaea, to hammer out the details and create a single, unified doctrine for his new favorite faith. Now, you might be wondering, was this Christian takeover a sure thing? Well, not quite. About 50 years after Constantine, his nephew, an emperor named Julian, tried to turn back the clock. He was a devout pagan and tried to bring back the old gods. But here's the kicker. He only reigned for 2 years, and his project completely failed. If anything, it just proved how deeply Christianity had already woven itself into the fabric of the empire. The momentum was just unstoppable. Okay, so this brings us to the grand finale in our 70-year story. This is the moment Christianity goes from being the favored religion to being the only official religion. Finally, in the year 380, Emperor Theodosius I took that last decisive step. He issued the Edict of Thessalonica, and with this single decree, the 70-year transformation was finally complete.
And the contrast between the beginning and the end of this journey is just wow. The Edict of Milan back in 313 made Christianity tolerated. You were simply allowed to be a Christian. But the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 made it mandatory. All other pagan cults were now officially outlawed. The tables had completely and irreversibly turned.
So, a 70-year shift in an ancient empire? Okay, cool story, but why should we care about this today? Well, because the consequences of what happened in this short period fundamentally shaped the world that you and I are living in right now.
So what was the long-term fallout? Well, for starters, the whole idea of the church being a major political power, that started right here, a concept that would dominate Europe for more than 1,000 years. A lot of old pagan traditions didn't just vanish. They were absorbed, with festivals and customs getting blended into a new Christian culture. Roman identity itself got totally redefined as being Christian. And maybe biggest of all, this new Christian Roman Empire laid the direct political, cultural, and religious foundation for all of medieval Europe.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty mind-blowing question to think about. From the calendar we use to our basic ideas about law and society, how much of our world today is still living in the echo of a decision made by a Roman emperor at a battle nearly 1,700 years ago? It's a powerful reminder of how a few pivotal decades can change the course of history forever.